Today I'm sitting down with my brother, Stef, to chat about one of his favorite movies, Shutter Island by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Ruffalo, Michelle Williams, and Ben Kingsley. We're going to extensively go through the plot, carefully untangling a very complex but fascinating story and a shocking ending. Then we'll discuss how we feel about the character of Teddy, the music, the cinematography, the themes, and so much more, including my hot take on why Leo has never settled down. But for now, sit back, relax, and welcome to my film club. Today I want to welcome my little brother onto the podcast to talk about one of his favorite movies. So first of all, welcome Stef.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about one of your favorite movies. At the end, we'll discuss how far up the list of favorites it is. But today we're going to do Shutter Island. Let's just start from a bird's eye view. Why is this movie so important to you? Why do you like it so much?
So I feel like movies, they send you from one direction to another, and you're not really sure where the story goes from one side to another. They send you in one direction, and then actually, oh no, plot twist is this. And I really feel like with Shutter Island, it's that, but like times 1,000. And it really, you think it's going in certain direction, and it's just the fact that at the end it blows you completely out of the water. And I just feel like I really love that because it really puts a real magnifying glass on that.
I totally get what you mean, and it's a very particular type of movie, and we'll talk in the entertainment about what it is about that you find so entertaining, because it's not for everyone. I personally love it as well. But let's start with some basics of when did you first see this movie? So it came out in 2010.
Yeah, so I think I saw it around 2014, so about 10 years ago.
And you've seen it about, you said, a half dozen times since then.
6
So
times, yeah.
Probably one of the movies you've watched the most.
Yes, yep.
And so, well, you gave an idea of the theme. And so give us a synopsis of the movie. Spoiler free, what is this movie roughly about?
So the movie is about 2 US Marshals who have been sent onto this island, which is a mental institute. So a lot of people with extreme mental health disorders, and who are sent to this island to investigate the disappearance of one of the patients. And so it's all about this investigation that is led by the main character, Teddy, played by Leonardo DiCaprio.
That's right. They're basically just a straightforward crime investigative thing. Nothing weird happening there.
Exactly.
So yeah, you mentioned starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Mark Ruffalo is his partner. Ben Kingsley is the main psychiatrist on there. Michelle Williams is his wife, which appears in some strange ways that we'll talk about. But yeah, great cast. So as I said, the movie was released in 2010. It was based on a novel of the same name by someone called Dennis Lehane. One of the things I found so interesting doing this podcast is that so many movies are actually based on some other form of literature, whether it's short stories or books, directly or indirectly. But I'd say, really, if you dig into it, most movies are in some form or another based on books, which is not something that you realize at first. Did you know that it was based on a book?
After having watched it and looking into it, I did find out. But no, when I initially watched it, I didn't know that. No.
Have you read the book?
No, I haven't read the book. Have you?
I haven't, but I checked I always check the synopsis of the book and stuff to see if it's different, because sometimes, like we did Arrival recently, which actually there's a fun link between this movie and Arrival, which we'll get to later. But Arrival was like a bit different. Sometimes it's loosely based, like when we did The Mask of Zorro, that's based on the character. But this one seems to be pretty much a beat for beat. There's a couple of small differences that we might talk about in the story. But roughly speaking, it is the same story, the same characters, and all of that. So very much an adaptation of it. So it was a relative critical success. I say relative because Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio have a track record of success. And it was commercially very successful. It was actually Scorsese's most successful commercial movie until Wolf of Wall Street came out a few years later. It was top of the box office for 2 weekends. And I think it was the 22nd highest grossing movie of the year. So, not the biggest movie, but a very successful, especially for a darker, adult, non-superhero movie. So let's talk about the reviews. On Rotten Tomatoes, the tomato meter, this is the critics. What do you think the score was?
I'll give it 72%.
69, so very close. The big question here is always not even more important almost than getting the exact number is about who rated it higher, the critics or the people. So the reviewers said 69. What do you think the audience said? So what do you think they said? And more importantly, do you think it was higher or lower than the critics?
Sorry, so the critics said 69.
Yep.
Critics said 69. I'll say viewers higher. 76.
77? So very, very close. Great. And then IMDb, so score out of 10. Do you want to give that one a guess?
7.4.
8.2. So you're better at Rotten Tomatoes than IMDb. So final question before we cross the spoiler line. I always ask my guests this before we cross it. In what context would you recommend this movie to someone? In other words, what kind of person and in what kind of mood would they have to be? And they say, Steph, what should I watch? And for you to say, watch Shutter Island.
And you definitely need to be in a mood where you want a serious movie. So it's definitely not a lounging, relaxing movie. So you want to be in a serious state of mind. And for the type of person, I guess, I feel like it ranges for quite wide audience. But I mean, I guess if you like thriller drama movies.
I'll add, you hinted at it, but this is not exactly like you said, lounging movie. This is definitely one where your head will hurt at the end. And so if you want to be intellectually stimulated, this is the movie for you. So with that said, we're now going to cross the spoiler line. So we've done our best up until this point to not spoil anything. So if you haven't watched this movie before, you can pause now and go and watch it. If you have and you don't really remember it and you want to be fresh, go ahead. Or if you've seen it before or haven't and you want to hear our thoughts and then decide whether you want to watch it, you've been warned. It's the spoiler line. Now that we've crossed the spoiler line, I like to start with the entertainment value of a movie. Because no matter everything else, I think the most important thing, the most foundational thing about a movie has got to be its entertainment value. So, some movies are just funny. Some movies are like at edge of your seat because of the action. They may make you cry. They may make you scared. What kind of entertainment value does this movie provide to you?
So I'd say one of the emotional parts, a lot around the World War II aspects, looking back at his experience in World War II, finding the concentration camps. I think that plays a very big part to it. The other, obviously, then the entertainment around finding out at the end what everything happened and the whole story coming together. That is, I guess, to finish. And then, of course, the other part is along the way, you're trying to figure out, along with Teddy, you're trying to figure out what is going on in this story. And so that entertainment is, I mean, a bit in the sense of whodunit. You're always thinking, who might be the murderer? Here's obviously it's a bit different, but it's still like you're still trying to think, what could be going on here? And so you're really, along with the character, trying to figure out what is going on. So that's the entertainment part.
Yeah, I think that definitely the biggest part is the mystery element, which we'll talk about this more in the story. But what I really like about this movie is there's so many movies like this which end up quite ambiguous. Like, ooh, was that real? Was that not? Or what? Whereas this one, I was pretty sure on my most recent rewatch, but I've done my internet research and there's no real ambiguity. Like 99% of people agree about exactly what happened. We'll talk about it more in the story, but I think that's a big thing because sometimes you spend 2 hours piecing together, remembering people, figuring out what happened, and at the end it's like, the director's like, hey, it's up to the audience to decide. It's like, no, tell me what it was supposed to mean. So yeah, I agree with all of that. And it hits a lot of like genres. It's not, I would never put it as a horror movie, but there is definitely an element of dread. So you definitely feel a bit like anxious sometimes. And yeah, the mystery, it's not a romance movie, but there is obviously an element with his wife, which is quite, as you say, emotional. The historical aspect of the World War II camp is like very poignant as well. So yeah, I agree with you on those. Lots of different forms of entertainment. Do you agree about this lack of ambiguity at the end, or do you think there's a little bit of room for maneuvering?
No, I think there's a little bit of room for maneuvering with one of the final sentences in the movie. I think you can definitely debate the other way of which way does it stand.
Well, we'll leave that one for the next section, which we're going to get to now, but at the end of it. So that takes us very nicely to the story. So I think, obviously, we start with the entertainment, but I think the story is probably the most important part of this movie because it is what brings you in. It's what keeps you guessing and everything. Obviously, the acting, the production, we'll talk about, and that's all amazing. But I think the story is the most interesting thing about this movie. So, as we've discussed, I think the best way to do this is to kind of do the story you see the first time you watch it, and then the actual story, aka the story that you see when you rewatch it afterwards. I've watched this movie 4 or 5 times, and this last time with Sunita, I was like, I remember that there's a big twist at the end, and I'm pretty sure I remember what it is, but I wasn't totally sure. But we figured it out quickly, and it is. I think in the past, every time I watched it, I'd probably forgotten. I knew there was a twist, but I'd forgotten exactly what it was.
What the actual twist was.
Yeah, I definitely think that when I watched it a couple of years ago, because it has been a while, it had been long enough. Maybe I have only watched it 3 times actually, but this time I knew what it was. And as soon as you remember it or know it, you just see the movie in a completely different way. Like something as simple as his first line about the fact that like he hates the sea, aka water, and obviously
cigarettes as well.
The cigarettes is a huge thing. Or the whole like that. A small thing is Mark Ruffalo. An eagle-eyed viewer who hasn't seen this for the first time, I think would notice like Mark Ruffalo when he's like giving his gun at the beginning and he sort of fumbles it.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's the sort of thing. Even if you're eagle-eyed, you just kind of. Yeah. You're not paying attention to that sort of thing, but when you're rewatching it, you're like, that's because he's not a real police officer, so he's like messing around with his gun. So I'm going to go through the story A, and you tell us your favorite scenes as they happen. Obviously, it's quite a complicated story, so I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. So Teddy, the main character, or, well, we're going to call him Teddy, but we know that that's not actually his real name, is a U.S. Marshal who seemingly is coming to an asylum to investigate the disappearance of a patient. He is accompanied by his new partner, Chuck, played by Mark Ruffalo. And so they have to investigate one of the patients who, Rachel Solando, who supposedly disappeared, and that's on this island. So one of your first favorite scenes is the interrogation. So tell us about that and why you find that one so interesting.
Yeah, so again, this is on the theme of your route. You're trying to understand what happened. So this is like one of the first steps where you get some information of what has gone on. And just like Teddy, when you're watching it, you're just trying to piece things together. As well, very, very interesting as well, the state of mind of the inmates, and you just think, wow, they're really living in a completely different world. You feel for them, and you're really just trying to understand what is wrong with them. And then contrasting actually that Teddy is interrogating, he's completely normal and is a U.S. Marshal here interrogating. So yeah, at this point you really have no idea what's going on, and you're surprised at the mental state of these people that they're interrogating and what they've done and how insane it is.
Which ones are you thinking of in particular?
The man who was very, very obnoxious about the women, and then actually just turned around and basically murdered them because she had talked to him weirdly, I think. And then also the one who seems relatively normal initially, but then who was talking normally, but then actually I think her was interesting, the contrast between, which Teddy also noticed, her seeming relatively normal, talking one-on-one, but then actually had done some horrific things.
Do you talk about the older woman?
Yeah,
I think she'd killed her husband or something.
Yeah,
but
that's
right. I think, but he had done something bad to her. He kind of had it coming. Yeah. Yeah, and then he also talks to the staff during that bit. Well, one thing talking about the story, because again we're just chatting about it here. So that means that the doctors got all of these patients to collaborate on this role play.
Yeah, well, that was also the other part is, I wasn't sure whether they were actually collaborating, but then they do make the first guy who talks about, I think, it was either rape or murder because she talked to him in a weird way. He says that he knew Rachel, which meant that actually he had to be completely
because Rachel Solando does not exist at all.
No, that's right. So he had to.
Because the staff, it makes sense that they were in on it, they were helping. And I do find it super interesting, you can see them sort of like at one point they talk about the doctor who's not on the island anymore, and they look at Mark Ruffalo because it's in fact him.
Yeah.
And I've read this thing about how you can tell that the guards, even though they're in the background, you can just tell how exasperated they are about the whole thing because they think this whole thing is stupid.
Yeah.
But the fact that he gets the patients to go along with it is a bit weird.
And also just a note on the guards as well, another one. When you see the camera shots, the person they're interviewing has a guard behind them. Teddy has a guard behind him, but then obviously the
Mark
doctor,
Ruffalo
Mark Ruffalo does not have any guard behind him.
I didn't notice that, but I did read about that. So he interviews a bunch of people, but as they dig around, Teddy confesses to Chuck, Mark Ruffalo, that his real mission is to find Andrew Latus, who he says killed his wife in a fire. And at this point, I think we've already seen Michelle Williams sort of appear. It does not take long to start getting these like weird flashbacks of her. Yeah. And then over the course of the movie, there's a bunch of so we're not sure if they're flashbacks or visions or imaginations, and there's both, and they're mostly her, but also his time in World War II, where he liberated a concentration camp and found thousands of dead Jews, and obviously he deserves it, but that horrific scene about the German that failed to kill himself with his face hanging off. So he's having these visions, and he's quite confused at this point, and he starts to think that there's clandestine mind control experiments happening. And as he starts investigating that, he starts getting paranoid that they're framing him for being crazy, basically. They say that they found this Rachel, but it's very clear, I think, to everyone that there's something fishy going on. That's another fun one. This is from before, but you know when he finds the note right at the beginning, they say obviously he knew where the note was because it was his note, and they find the shoes. And they say, oh, she must be out there without shoes. But the shoes are obviously men's shoes, so it's obviously his room. Yeah, that's like one of those small things. And that is one of the things that's interesting is how I think on first watch you think he's a really good detective because he's asking questions, he's picking up on things and he's taking himself very seriously. But like when you rewatch it, you're like, he's literally just like this like idiot, just like bumping into walls. Like it's so obvious on rewatch, like something like the shoes. Like if he was such a good detective, he would be like, wait, these are men's shoes. Wait a second, there's something going wrong. So that is like a weird thing.
Yeah.
He has a couple of really, so we talked about him interviewing the patients, but really, like between the mysteries bits, a lot of this movie is just him talking to various people for like fairly, 5-10 minutes. And one of the more important conversations is the George Noyce one because he's not going along with the role playing. I don't think, he's telling him things which he's hearing in one way, but on the second watch means something different. So, tell us about that scene.
Yeah, so that one on first watch is you kind of, you just discredit. You don't really understand what he's talking about. But again, he's on the Ward C as well, so he's like proper on the completely crazy side. So you just really discredit what he has to say because at first it doesn't really make sense. And that's really one of those scenes that as you watch them, the words that he used make more and more sense. As you say, interesting from him. He is one of the ones that does not play along with it, and tells it how it is, tells the truth actually. Which, and that, so in the end, actually, because of what he's saying, he turns out to not seem that great. It seems pretty sensible what he's actually saying.
Yeah, I've got one of the lines I've got is, this is a game, all of this is for you, you're not investigating anything, you're a fucking rat in a maze. And that's where, I think even though he's obviously crazy, this is where all the suspicion about this is more than it seems, for both him and for us, starts about, oh, this is more than just investigating someone escaping. This is something bigger, but it's not what we think it is. It's not, and it's not what he thinks it is. It's that line, you're a fucking rat in a maze. We'll talk about the theme of mazes like throughout because I think even when you talked about the beginning about the entertainment value, it is like solving a maze. It's like getting out of a maze. They say in the cinematography that it's very much like it feels like he's lost, even though he's not physically getting lost in the corridors, but he's just getting lost, mentally in the corridors. So and I think George Noyce is, even though he's probably the craziest, he seems like the craziest person, he's actually like the most straightforward one. He's
at least from that certain aspect that you saw of him.
Yeah. So there's the fake Rachel. Well, there's the real person that's a fake Rachel, which I don't think he even buys. And then he like runs away and he finds the real Rachel, which is in fact the imaginary one in the cave, which confirms all of his conspiracy theory. So you love that scene. You find that scene quite interesting as well.
Yeah. So it took. Even by the second watch, I still may have thought, wait, was this actually happen? And then obviously you remember the comments of the doctor saying, oh, about the hallucinations. But you're still actually, maybe on the second watch, still wasn't 100% sure whether that scene was real. Yeah, it is clear. It's clearly completely a projection from his mind of what is going on. I found this part interesting because of it's obviously setting up a whole conspiracy theory in his head, which is completely not true. However, the only one thing which has sometimes potential parallel to conspiracy theories in real is that they might start from a very glimmer of truth. And just like from this is there's operations on the mind, i.e. there's like they're going to be doing lobotomies on people if they don't act out. So there's that, so some operations on the mind. So there's that little sliver of truth in that then obviously gets obliterated into something that is completely crazy and conspiracy theorist, which I thought that was interesting.
I mean, you could take it a step further and argue that what they are actually doing is sort of a form of, it's not mind control. Like at one point they say about, oh, the Soviets and the communists and that the Nazis again, they want to use this technology to like control the masses. Obviously, it's not that, but they are trying to control his mind to bring him back to reality. So I totally get what you mean, and you are right. Like most conspiracy theories, there's a kernel of truth in it, but then he makes it into something like, oh yeah, they're experimenting on people in the lighthouse. And then after that, that's I think where things start to really unravel. So then he returns back to the doctors and stuff. This is where he mentions Chuck, and the doctor says, "You were here by yourself, Marshall." And that's when you're like, as the viewer, you're like, "Oh, these people are fucking with him." Which actually they are at that point. They are fucking with him because they obviously know that he was there with someone, so they are deliberately trying to fuck with him. And obviously more stuff happens. He blows off the car and stuff. But at this point, he thinks he knows exactly what's happening. Mind control. I need to go into the lighthouse, break into the lighthouse, expose everything. That scene when he's in the lighthouse and there's just nothing there is like heartbreaking. And then basically, he finds Ben Kingsley and everything falls apart. And it turns out that it's all bullshit. And the true story is that in fact, he was a patient at the asylum. He's been there for 2 years. The flashbacks. Do you remember on the first viewing? Because at this point we've seen all the flashbacks we've seen. Actually, no, we don't actually fully see the kids being drowned by her and lined up until the ending bit. Yeah. So I think we've seen a lot of imagery, which makes sense later on, of her with the blood. We've seen his dead kids mixed together with Auschwitz and saying this is your fault, but we think there is guilt because of World War II, but it's actually they're mixing the two to confuse us. So what actually happened is he had PTSD from Auschwitz and World War II in general. He came back, was an alcoholic. His wife was a manic depressive. There's no implication that it was because of him that she was like that. It just seems like she was a crazy person and he didn't recognize it and deal with it. He just sort of ignored it. He was away a lot. He moved them even after she burned down their apartment. That was one of the things that he says that Andrew Lightus burned down the house, but she actually did it and didn't die in it. They moved to the countryside. They have 3 kids. He's away all the time. She has an episode, murders their 3 kids. He murders her, gets institutionalized, but then has just spent 2 years refusing to accept what has happened. And they are now trying to this is one last attempt at getting him to accept what he did so that he can just sort of like live out his sentence there, because otherwise they're going to have to lobotomize him. That's most of the points. Yeah. So it's quite the twist. How do you remember feeling the first time? Did it all make sense at the end, or did you just go, huh?
I'm trying to remember. I think a part. It's still it came together somewhat, but there were still parts where that didn't make sense, and I needed to rewatch it to really understand everything, because even as it was slowly coming together, like in one of the second to last scenes when he comes back and the main physician announced to him that he hasn't got that he didn't have a partner there, so it was starting to unravel at that point, and that's when then he goes and blows up the car and it goes all around the grounds before going to the lighthouse. Still at that point, I was still kind of clinging to, wait, maybe he is about to uncover something, you just don't know, and it's just so, like, then the final in the lighthouse, it is just so mind-blowing what just happened, that there was still aspects that I thought I definitely need to understand a bit more of all of this.
The thing that's so confusing about it, and this is a term back from our literary days, is this is a perfect example of an unreliable narrator. Obviously, we're seeing everything through his point of view, but we realize fairly quickly, well, not quickly, we realize by a certain point that we can't believe everything that he's showing us. Like the stuff that he's showing us in flashbacks aren't necessarily literally true. And this is, I always find this a bit frustrating as a viewer, is that you realize that there are literally things that we are shown which weren't there. Like when he sees Mark Ruffalo down on the rocks, that did not happen. That was purely his imagination. And so that's when Ben Kingsley says, you don't have a partner. You question, I said a few minutes ago, oh, we know they're fucking with them now, but actually you think, wait, did he have a partner? Did he imagine him? And actually now I'm thinking, because we've seen this in other movies where there's a character that's there the whole time, but that actually no one else acknowledges. Does Mark Ruffalo get acknowledged by other people? Like, do we actually see people interact with him? You know what I mean? Sometimes in movies there's like someone that we see there the whole time, but then it turns out they were only in the imagination of the main character.
Trying to think, like even when they first arrive and they ask for the gun.
They asked for the gun, and yeah. You know, actually, one thing, you mentioned this before, one thing that he definitely does, Mark Ruffalo, is he lights his cigarettes all the time.
Yeah.
There's like a whole thing there about how at the beginning, his personalities, his like fake personalities and real personality are completely split, and the whole point is of this exercise is to bring them back together. And one of the things is that he refuses to like use a lighter or matches at the beginning because it reminds him of the arson and the flat being burnt down. And so Mark Ruffalo is like always lighting his cigarettes and stuff. One important thing we have to say with the real story is obviously the drugging. So they are drugging him throughout. Well, actually,
no. When he's during the game.
During the role play.
No, I think they stopped drugging him.
So the whole thing about they've been giving you cigarettes and...
Well, no, that was
all
that was Rachel. That was in her. That was his mind.
Yeah, but it's just so obvious them giving him... So they were just giving him the cigarettes to be nice.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, oh yeah. There's always pieces that you don't fully get. Yeah, because he says at the end that he's having withdrawal symptoms from the antipsychotics. So he is actually lucid.
Yeah.
Well, it's clearly not working for him.
Yeah, well, no, that's the point. He's having... he calls it withdrawal. The doctor calls it withdrawal.
Withdrawal, yeah. Okay, yeah, no, that's something that I did still miss. I thought they were giving him something to help guide him along the route, but no, they were getting him off the drugs. Here's a random thing in the story. It's not worth talking about in the characters. The German... This is always a thing with these movies that are based on books, is that there's elements which maybe don't make a whole lot of sense from a movie's point of view, but they're just taking them from the book and they want to be faithful to it. So maybe this is where this character was more developed. But what's the point of the German doctor? You know, the one who sounds British, but then he's like, you're a German.
I think, it's definitely to add the aspect of the World War II coming back to him and him having fought. So I think it makes you, again, if you're first viewing it, feeling the attachment to Teddy, and you feel like there's something that's not quite right, and I guess that the fact that there's this German there kind of just reinforces your attachment to Teddy and his fighting during World War II.
So he's just there for intrigue, really.
Yeah.
The storm. This is actually something I have in my questions about. It's very convenient that this storm is happening, but the implication is that they knew it was coming, so they used the opportunity of the storm to set all this up.
There was no storm.
What?
There was no storm. I think the storm is all in. It's all in his mind.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that one?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. I'd say this. I've accepted this on my latest watch. If you look at the final scene when they take him out, everything is all clean.
Oh, so
it was the day before. It was a complete chaos the day before. They wouldn't have cleaned overnight.
But everyone's talking about the storm.
That's what you see.
Right. Wow, I didn't know this one. Have you read this anywhere, or this is just your conclusion?
I have. I think I have read it, and I was maybe read it before I rewatched it the latest time. But there's one sentence that when they're explaining everything to Teddy in the lighthouse, he goes along when he's explaining, oh, this isn't true. He talks about whatever, the hallucination, the investigation, him and one of the things he mentions is that apparently so he's going through all the things that when Andrew Ladis is crazy, he's talking about all these things he's inventing himself, and one of the things is and the storm, i.e. and yes, the storm is also one of these crazy things that you keep mentioning.
He says that.
He says the storm. He mentions
enough.
the storm. Yeah.
I mean, that would make sense. God, well, I'm gonna have to rewatch it again now to double check that. Because okay, what about? So it didn't even rain, or just that it? Because what about when they get drenched in their clothes and they need to change the clothes?
I don't know whether but there definitely. I read it as there definitely wasn't a storm as bad as they made it out to be.
Right, the storm was in his mind.
Yeah.
Well, I have to check that again. Yeah, since I've said that was in my questions, maybe you got some really good answers for some of these as well. So the whole point of the role play, so actually we didn't get to the end, we didn't get to the bottom of that. So the whole point of the role play is he's in the psychiatric hospital and he refuses to acknowledge what his wife did, what happened to his kids. He never acknowledges having kids, really. And then what he did to his wife. So that's three. Really?
No, he definitely doesn't acknowledge having kids because once he starts showing them initially, his initial reaction is, I don't have kids.
Yeah. So he's in the hospital. They want to get him to accept that. And basically, as he ignores everything they say because of the fact that he says there's this conspiracy theory that they're trying to develop mind control. This is a pre-existing notion he has in his head when Rachel 2 says it. As we said, it's a projection from his mind. So basically, before the movie starts, he's in the hospital. They're trying to convince him. They've tried everything for 2 years. And he's like, no, you're trying to control me, blah, 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 conspiracy theory. And the whole point of the role play is for him to basically both come to terms with the things, with like the hints of Rachel and stuff. Like the fact that they say that basically Rachel is his wife. It brings up those things so he can piece them together. But the big thing, my understanding, is that it is also for him to realize that his conspiracy theory is completely wrong. There is no mind control happening. Why then do they put a limit on his investigation? Because it does feel for the first half of the movie that he keeps asking to see things or do things, and they're like, you can't do this and you can't do that.
Yeah, I'm actually been wondering the same thing because it sets him up to be confused.
Yes.
Because they're being so sketchy
Yes.
about many things. It might be just as part of the medical push for him to try and figure it out by himself, but I'm not too sure, what the point is of it being so
Maybe
sketchy.
there were just, when you said the medical thing, maybe there are just like rules that they can't
Yeah.
have a patient going through confidential files or something, because he isn't actually a marshal, so he hasn't got the right to do that. Because one of the interesting things is the one piece of paper they do give him is the form that shows that he's Andrew Lightus, and he just completely ignores it, which makes me think maybe the parts where he's asking for stuff and he's not getting it is completely in his head as well, because so much is.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But that is one that I really found interesting, is when Ben Kingsley is explaining everything to him at the end, he says the intake form that was given to you by Mark Ruffalo and you just refuse to look at it. So that's like and it is a weird scene. He's given this piece of paper and he just refuses to look at it.
Because I think at that point he just doesn't trust anything anymore that is being given to him, and he wants to see. Yeah, I know.
I think it's a perfect example of the double stuff. When you watch it the first time, you're supposed to think what you just said, but when you watch it the second, it's clearly a case that he subconsciously knows what's on that form and he doesn't want to see it, because if he sees a form that has his picture on it and his name and he realizes he's Andrew Lightus, it's going to cause like a psychotic break. And I think that's it. Like, they've obviously tried sitting him down and telling him everything, and he just goes, no, nothing is true. And so the idea here is to ease him in, like a little bit of like the whole patient 67. The idea is that he's supposed to solve the mystery that he's patient 67, and I think that's where the form was supposed to help him with that. But he just, nope, I forgot. Because he loses interest in the whole Rachel Salondo thing pretty quickly, because basically becomes, I'm here for her. Oh, no, wait, I'm here for the mind control. Oh, no, they're trying to frame me for being crazy. He just kind of jumps from one thing to another, which, again, on first viewing, you just think the plot is escalating. But on second viewing, you're just like, no, he's just has no attention span. As soon as something falls apart, again, just like a conspiracy theory, you prove that one part isn't real, and they're like, okay, but what about this? And you're like, no, but can we just focus on the fact that your first thing wasn't true? Because the fact is, they give him Rachel 1, even though we know later she's fake. He should have just been, okay, that's fine. But he goes, no, there's more going on here.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of explains I think we've sort of answered the limitations. Here's another one, and it's a movie, I get. How do they reset him at the beginning of the movie? Like, how do they get him to just think that he's a U.S. Marshal who's just gotten onto the boat?
I don't think it's that difficult, because I think in his craziness on the island, all these kinds of things is what he thinks is the situation. So just like the parallel Rachel, they set that up as she just thinks this person is the milkman and she's living at home. I think in his mind, on the island, he's still a U.S. Marshal,
Right.
And there is, we get one of them, and then there is a storm, and there a lot of the themes along is just how he is in his crazy mind. So I think there might not have been that much to set up, because that's just how he is thinking. And so I think, yeah, they've set that whole role play to mold, at least at the beginning, to start it all around what he thinks his life is like.
So you think, let's say, a month before the beginning of the movie, he's in a cell, they're having a session, and he's like, I'm a U.S. Marshal, and you're holding me here against my will.
I think so. I think he's still. Yeah, I think he definitely. The doctor explicitly says you still think you're a U.S. I think he still thinks he was a U.S. Marshal while he was on the island.
That's one point. But then how? So that's why he thinks that. That's fine, and I get about how then you encourage it by this is your partner, this is your case. He's like, oh yeah, so I am right. But how come he forgets about everything that happened before?
Oh, I mean, I'm no doctor, but I think he's so insane that maybe a combination of he's so insane that his memory just isn't, he just doesn't remember and blocks things out all the time, and then maybe the drugs that they give him.
So you think because he's off the drugs, he's like seeing things differently? Because even at the beginning he's sick.
Yeah.
And it's in part because he's like the withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
Wait, so when they're giving him aspirin and stuff for his migraine, that's why I'm like, this is so obviously they're feeding him stuff. Is that actually just aspirin?
I would say so, yeah. In reality, I would interpret that as he's having withdrawal, and so they're just trying to ease a little bit his withdrawal with like just aspirin.
Yeah, because that's one on this one. I'm like, God, they just keep giving him drugs, but no, it is actually aspirin. Wait, so that's such the first time you watch it, you think, this is actually, it's more than just double. There's almost like a triple. The first time you think, oh, he is, no, actually, the first time they give him the pills, the first time you're watching it, first time you probably think it's fine. Yeah. But then when it happens 2 or 3 times, because it does, and that's when you start being like, oh no, they are drugging him. But then you realize later on, like on second watch, that actually, I definitely thought on my second, third, and fourth, that they were still drugging him at that point, but now I do understand from what you said that no, that's... Yeah, there's a lot of things like that are meant to confuse you. But I get your point, because they want him to be lucid.
Yeah.
Obviously now we need to talk about the ending. So, he hears the truth, he has a psychotic break, passes out, comes around, both literally and he accepts, not outside the penultimate scene, he seemingly accepts... That's it. I think they make him say, you need to tell us, and he says, and that's where he makes it crystal clear what happened. My wife killed our kids, I killed her, blah, blah, blah. Then he's outside. We didn't say it explicitly. Mark Ruffalo turns out to be his doctor, but who was chaperoning him throughout to like care for him and protect him. That's one thing, maybe on the first time when you're figuring everything out, and even the second, you don't realize it, but there are people on the island that are definitely bad guys, like the warden, who's like, I want to just beat the shit out of you, like you're an animal. But the Ben Kingsley character and the Mark Ruffalo character, they genuinely care for Teddy. And obviously what he did is terrible, but I think we can all empathize about why he did it. So that's, obviously they feel that way.
Well, as he says at the beginning, he's like, he's not here to judge their act, and to them they're just patients. Which
is a great quote. We'll talk about how we feel about Teddy when we talk about the characters, because that's like a whole conversation. But so it's the end. After that, as you say, he's at the pristine. Now that you've said it, I feel like I did read something somewhere, someone once saying about how beautiful it was after the storm. Yeah, they do take very good care of those grounds. So he sat there, and they've basically laid out at this point that this is, if he's fine, then he's okay, but if he relapses, they're going to lobotomize him. And Mark Ruffalo sits next to him. I think he's quite clearly the doctor as well. and he's just like, how are you doing? And he says like, I need to get off this rock, Chuck, which implies that he's relapsed. Mark Ruffalo gives a signal to Ben Kingsley, and he very, very voluntarily goes with them, and they show the spite that they're going to lobotomize him. What is your and so the very, very important line. We'll talk about it more in the dialogue, but for the case of the ending, one of the final line Leo says is, "Which would be worse, to live as a monster or die as a good man?" And then walks off to be. He says that after saying the Chuck thing, and also Mark Ruffalo then does say. Does he say Teddy or does he say Andrew? So okay, you give me your interpretation of the ending.
Teddy Andrewlatus, as I think I interpret it as, in that moment realizes he knows who he is, but would prefer not to take the risk of relapsing, and so chooses the lobotomy whilst he basically still has his wits with him. So yeah, that's what.
And then so he says that, die a good man. Do you think? And then he says, do you think Mark Ruffalo realizes what he's doing? Because I think that's it. From him saying that, he pieces it together, and I think that's it. No, that's it. As he gets up, he says Teddy, and Leo doesn't even like react, because the fact is he's pretending to be Teddy, so he should respond to Teddy, but he doesn't, because he's actually Andrewlitis. And I think Mark Ruffalo knows that they're sending someone who's lucid to get lobotomized, but it doesn't matter, it's too late.
Yeah. I also, just right before the precursor to that, I'm not sure why he goes, "Hey boss," like he's in Teddy, he starts the conversation as him already being in Teddy mode.
I think he's testing him.
Yeah.
I think he's prompting him as if he was Teddy to see if whether he is Teddy or he snaps back into Teddy, which obviously he seemingly does. I interpret it, so I don't disagree with what you said, but I see a variant to it. Obviously the relapse is a big thing. Ben Kingsley does say that they've done this before, and that it's crazy. They don't specifically say they went through this exact same thing before, but they do say they did something. So you imagine if all the staff and stuff, this is like, we've done this already and it didn't work. We're really spending 3 days doing this.
No, I don't think they went to that extent.
Yeah, but he relapsed. I think obviously there's the fear of the relapse, but I think it is more just generally, even if he doesn't relapse, he doesn't want to live knowing what he did, and he'd rather be dead or brain dead. So he would rather die a good man. I guess the dying a good man, no, I think you're right. The dying...
But at the same time, dying is because you wouldn't even.
You
wouldn't even die. You'd be dying late. He'd die later on, obviously.
Yeah, but he means die. Like his mind would die,
Yeah.
because the whole point of being lobotomized is that you're basically just like a vegetable. Then, so I think you are right. I think he means dying a good man, because at least he can like look his fate in the eye and be like, I'm making this conscious choice to this happening to me, rather than him relapsing, being crazy, and having it being forced upon him. But that's the thing. Live as a monster. They're kind of to live as a monster makes me think of my theory that he doesn't want to be lucid, knowing what he did, which means he would live as a monster. But maybe dying as a good man means he's pretending to be, even though he knows he's not. He's pretending to be Teddy, and Teddy is a good man. So Teddy gets lobotomized, which means Teddy is dying a good man. Whereas if he doesn't get lobotomized, he's Andrew, and Andrew is living as a monster. Does that work?
Say that last part again.
His two options are basically. So we both agree that up until the end he is lucid. He knows that he's Andrewlitis. So if he just stays as Andrewlitis, Chuck comes over and says, "Oh hey boss," and he's like, "Why are you talking like to me, doctor?" He goes, "Okay, great, thumbs up, everyone's fine." He then just stays on the island forever, knowing what he did. So he's living as a monster. Yeah. Whereas if he pretends to be Teddy, who is a good man, and he gets lobotomized, he's dying as a good man.
Yeah, in his eyes.
Because otherwise, I mean, we're nitpicking here. But if he is, obviously live as a monster is unambiguous. Andrewlitis is not a good man.
No.
Obviously, he's a man of violence, not a violent man.
Yeah.
But he's not a good man. So I think he needs to be Teddy to die as a good man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, that does make sense, yeah.
Okay, I think we cracked it.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned before that you think there is some ambiguity in the end. This is what I was saying. I think, okay, we're nitpicking over the exact interpretation of the line and stuff. But to me, the fact that it was all in his head, the fact that what was real and what wasn't at the end, and then the fact that he definitely is lucid at the end and he is voluntarily getting lobotomized, to me, that's all clear cut.
Well, actually, but could you argue? How do we know? What tells us he is? Why could he not be completely back to Teddy at that point?
Because Mark Ruffalo says Teddy and he doesn't react, and that's meant to
Is that the? Is that?
And the line, to live as a monster or die as a good man, would make no sense for Teddy to say that. Would it?
Yeah, something referring to Ladus, i.e., what, in his mind, Ladus, but...
No, there's no... It's a very short conversation.
No.
And he says it, and it's very much like, he says, Chuck, we gotta get off this rock. And then the signal happens, and, like, everything falls into place. And then he really feels like, ironically, he's in control of the scene. Because once he knows that basically his fate is sealed, that's when he says the line to Mark Ruffalo. And then Mark Ruffalo realizes, oh, he's played us. He's actually lucid. We're about to lobotomize someone who doesn't need it. And that's when he says Teddy, and he just walks straight off. So even if he was Teddy, he would respond. Or even if he was Teddy and he didn't respond, it's saying he's ignoring him, so he's like accepting his fate. Because that's another thing you can tell from the body language of the way he gets up. He knows exactly. There's no forcing him.
Yeah.
He walks straight to his fate, like a man in a stereotypical point. So
Yeah, okay.
So do you concede it's not very ambiguous?
No, I concede. Yeah.
Okay, unambiguous ending. Love it.
Yeah, so about that final scene and that sentence, so I haven't read the book, but I read that it is different in the book, the sentences.
So the sentence, which would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man, is not in the book. I think it would actually be quite interesting to read that scene in the book and see maybe if it is. Obviously, books tend to be more like clear on what happened, whereas in films there's a lot more like interpretation. So that line isn't in it. It's possible, maybe because my guess, and I would want to check the book, this would be quite interesting. Maybe I'll get it for you for Christmas or something. Maybe because in the book it's described much more clear cut, whereas let's be honest, if they didn't have that line in the movie, it would be a lot more ambiguous. So I feel like they probably added that line in the movie to make it less ambiguous. But yeah, that line is not in the book, which is a key point. So as I think we said, the story is the most important part of this film, but it is very much helped by great actors, super interesting characters, great performances. We'll just start with Leo. One of my notes I have on this is his performance, because obviously he's an amazing actor. No one's arguing that. But he has a very particular style, and like he has a certain energy, which, I don't know, sometimes I find it a bit strange in certain roles. And I think this is a perfect example where when you're watching it for the first time, and he's just meant to be a U.S. Marshal, he has, I've written, fidgety energy. Obviously he's ill, but he is, again, fidgety, I think, is that. He's just like very, like, he seems very anxious. And I think that can be where I'm like, is this Leonardo DiCaprio overacting? And that was even knowing it, I get that sense. But then obviously you rewatch it and you with all the context, like, oh no, he's playing a crazy person who's playing a marshal, and he does an amazing job at it. He's like, it's such a good performance by him. It's not considered one of his best or anything, and as I'll say later, I love a lot of Leo movies, and this unfortunately is not high on that list, even though I think it's a great movie. But yeah, I think it is a great performance by him. This is one of your favorite movies, and we've talked about the story, which, would you say the story is the biggest factor for this being one of your favorite movies?
Yeah, definitely.
How important would you say the actors and how important would you say the acting is towards making this such a great movie?
Oh, well, obviously extremely important, and I think each of them play well because it's an interesting example of acting within acting
Yeah.
actually, and so that must be an even more difficult mindset of you're doing two-dimensional acting, and well, more I guess especially for the characters around Leo. The mainly Mark Ruffalo, the doctor, he's acting within the acting, and I think it is done really well, and with the other inmates as well, they've got acting within acting, and so that all really brings brings the dramatic effect to life, to not knowing what direction you're going with in the movie, especially on your first watch.
Yeah, I think there's something a bit off is the wrong word, but there's something a bit weird about everyone in this. Again, on first watch. Part of it is because they talk a bit different. Obviously, this movie takes place in the 50s, and yeah, everyone's a bit strange, but it's a mental asylum, so that's a bit normal. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The Mark Ruffalo and Ben Kingsley in particular, they come across a bit weird, but then obviously you understand why. So, and they have that really tall task of they need to play so that when you're watching it the first time, they don't give away the plot, but they need to play so that when you're watching it the second onwards, you can tell that they know that they're in on their role playing. Yeah, and that is.
And then you've got the in-between characters, which are basically not doing the acting. Those that don't believe in the experiment, and they're kind of just playing themselves, like putting little comments here and there, just not really caring about acting.
So, like the warden is the good example. He does not care about the experiment, and George Noyce. Like they're not the warden isn't actively trying to blow the cover, but he's not going along with it. But that's where the script, which we'll talk about later, is really well written, because they're saying things which can be ambiguous. They sort of still work in the fantasy, but then you also know what they're actually saying. Let's talk about Michelle Williams for a bit. I have it down that her character, she hasn't got a lot to work with. She literally is just crazy wife, murderer wife in flashbacks. She never has like a full scene or anything, so she just has to look sad and crazy all the time. So yeah, quite a cliche.
Yeah, I mean, not much movement as well. She's always just kind of standing still, not really doing much. Crying a bit, I guess, and trying to reassure Leo. But again, they're always, especially the first watch, they're always very weird, and you don't really understand what she's going on about.
Yeah. So I have a hot take about that this movie made me realize, and it came from the simple fact that Shutter Island comes out in 2010, which is the same year as Inception, which is crazy that he has these two movies coming out in the same year, a couple of months apart. But, so in Inception, his wife, Marion Cotillard, plays a similarly deranged wife. In that one, so in Inception, they live in their, like, Inception world, and she's not sure anymore what's real and what's not. So they escape the Inception world, but she's never sure if they're dreaming or not. And the only way to get out of the dream world is to kill yourself. So she kills herself in real life. So, two movies within the same year that Leo has a crazy wife. And obviously Leonardo DiCaprio, outside of being a great actor, one of the things that he's known for is being a lifetime bachelor. Obviously, a big part is only dating young women. But the big thing is that he never stays with anyone long. He never been married. And I'm going to defend poor Leo, because I think he has been scarred by the roles that he's played and the relationships he has with women in these movies. He'll hear me out. So we just in these two movies, within the same year, where both times his wife was a crazy person, one in which she murdered their 3 children and another where she killed herself. It doesn't work for every single movie he's done, but I have not found a single movie where he has a healthy relationship with someone that he's either married to or in a serious relationship with, and many where it's really traumatic. Romeo and Juliet, one of his old early roles, don't need to tell you how that ends. Not well for either of them. Soon after that, Titanic, finds the love of his life, she lets him die in the ice. He dies. Revolutionary Road, a few years later, he made that with Kate Winslet again. It's a movie about middle-class Americans and basically like how boring suburban life can be. In that one, his wife, again Kate Winslet, ends up performing an abortion on herself and then dying, so he's left widowed. Shutter Island, crazy wife that murders his kids. Inception, crazy wife that kills herself. The Great Gatsby, the woman that he falls in that he loves, her jealous husband kills his character, so he gets murdered over her. The Wolf of Wall Street, infidelity, domestic abuse, neither relationship goes well. Don't Look Up, where he plays a rather nice character, still cheats on his wife with Kate Blanchett, and most recently, Killers of the Flower Moon, he spends a 3-hour-long movie slowly poisoning his wife to be able to steal her land. So, poor Leo, maybe the reason he doesn't want to get in any relationships is because every relationship that he's ever played on screen has ended badly. And that's my hot take.
Yeah, Don't Look Up. He plays a bit of a different character than he usually does. A bit of a nerdy.
He
nerdy
does.
Character.
He never plays like a full-on tough guy, but he's always playing like a somewhat tough guy, and that guy is not tough. But even there, he's a little bitch boy who cheats on his wife, and that's not good. One last thing is, how do you feel about the character of Teddy Andrew? The first time when you rewatch, ultimately, how do you feel about him?
Both, whether it be the Andrew or Teddy.
Well, the person that he is.
Well, I guess I feel bad. You feel bad for him, don't you? I mean, he's done. Yeah, he's a veteran, and it's kind of it's tough. What's happened to him? Actually, another part on the story and the what is real or not. I think there's also ambiguity around whether he was actually in the concentration camp. And I think when it's all unraveling at the end, I think as well the doctor, he makes a comment as well around that actually maybe he might not have, he was a veteran, but he might not have actually been there liberating the camp.
I think what he says is you were at the camp, but you didn't kill, there's that image of him and a bunch of American soldiers shooting a bunch of Nazis, which apparently something like that did happen in real life, which I can't blame them.
Yeah.
But yeah, he tells him you didn't do that. I think he says that you might have been there. So he was definitely a soldier, definitely involved in it. But yeah, there's definitely some stuff that was shown to us that was not true. You're absolutely right. But that is a great point to bring up, because when I think it's one of those lines which sounds good, and then maybe you're like, oh, it's just fancy for the sake of it. But it keeps coming back to me is you're not violent men, you're men of violence. And I think Andrew Lightus, which is his real name, he's just a product of his environment. He just had no control over his life. We don't see anything before World War II, but I'm sure he was drafted. He went along. He was a patriotic man. He saw these horrors. He then dealt with them badly by becoming an alcoholic. Then it does seem like it was a bad combination of him being an alcoholic and his wife being a manic depressive, but it doesn't seem, there's no implication that he actually caused that in her, but he was just in denial, and maybe he loved her too much, which is why he denied that she was crazy. But I think the worst thing, the one thing that he is most culpable for is leaving his kids with his crazy wife. That's probably kind of unforgivable. And that is I think that's what he probably beats himself up more. I don't think
because the killing,
I don't think
you don't really know. No one knows how you would react to him in that situation.
I mean, I think everyone empathizes with him killing her there, and I think that you might think that the thing that he feels guilty about is killing his wife, and I'm sure it doesn't help. I'm sure it doesn't help with the whole thing, but I think it is more the whole visions of his daughter saying you were supposed to protect us, you let this happen. I think that's what's probably fucks him up more, because I think that's it. People say it's not even just that he let it happen because of the fact that really what he should have done is after she burnt down their flat, because it's not clear if they had the kids at that point, but after she burnt down the flat, he should have had her institutionalized, whether the kids existed or not at that point. But the fact is he didn't. He moved her to a house. He left her alone with the kids apparently he was gone for 2 weeks, because he makes a comment when he arrives oh, we've been on there. He was chasing someone. Yeah. So, and there was also something about her medication that there was a type of medication which she had access to, so she took a bunch of it and went crazy. So he definitely has some responsibility, but he's only human, and I think maybe his action at the end of basically deliberately lobotomizing himself is it an act of courage, or is it kind of cowardly because he doesn't want to deal with the result? Well, I guess there's nothing really to deal with, is that everyone's dead.
No, I think it is. I think it is quite courageous, yeah.
But is it? It's kind of... Wouldn't it be more courageous to live with the knowledge of what he's done? Live as a monster?
But he might not, though. In his mind, he might just be living then in a world where he hasn't done it.
Yeah. You mean he would rather go to his death knowing what he actually did than...
Then, yeah, that's it. He could be going to it never thinking that he did anything wrong.
If he waited. If he
waited.
It. Yeah, I guess there is some ambiguity there. But yeah, so his character, complex character, very complex. Yeah. But yeah, I think ultimately you feel bad for him. Yeah. And the other characters, as I said before, I think they're interesting, the Mark Ruffalo and Ben Kingsley, because you realize they do actually care about him. As you said, the quote about the patient.
It's not about... so Teddy at that point is making the point that they've been murderers or something, and
they talk back saying that it's not about, they're not the ones to judge what they've done, they're just here to treat them as patients and to try and help them,
which I think is fair, because the fact is they are an institution, so they're not there to be, they've been judged, they've been condemned, then now they're just to be treated. All right, so we've talked about the dialogue in the script quite a bit in the other section, so we won't spend too much time on it, but suffice to say, it's a very clever script. Lots of double entendres, as we said. The characters that say one thing and you hear it one way the first time and different the other one. Did you know that the twist on the title, Shutter Island?
Oh, is that this? It's an anagram for something, isn't it?
Truths and Lies. We didn't actually mention that, the whole anagram thing with the names.
Yeah, with the Rachel and Andrew Latus.
Yeah, so his name, Andrew Latus, and then Rachel Solando is his wife's name, and also his daughter was called Rachel, so there's like a thing there. And I think that is a really hard thing to do, because there's a lot of movies where there's a twist and you never actually saw it coming, but you never had a chance, because it just, like, that's one of the things actually that pisses me off the most in movies, is when at the end there's a reveal but there was no way to know it. And it's like, you can't do that. That's cheating. Yeah. You can't just show me one thing and say, actually, it was different. Then on the other hand, what's annoying is a movie where 5 minutes in, you're like, yeah, that person doesn't exist, or he's crazy or whatever. And Sixth Sense, I think, is one that when it came out, a lot of people didn't know the twist, but the twist got so known that now I feel like when you watch it, it is so obvious that Bruce Willis is dead, and the only person who can see it is the kid. Whereas this one, as we've said, there is a lot more, it's a lot more subtle. I don't think anyone would see it within the first few minutes. Once you know, and like stuff like the holster, there's all these like little things which are much more obvious, but not in an annoying way. You're never like, oh, I should have known that before. And honestly, I think that line that I'm describing is so hard. Also because people have different levels of attention, different levels of intelligence. We've had this debate with someone like Danny, who's been on the podcast. Like, he's extremely perceptive. And the problem is, if you make it so hard that someone like him has zero chance of seeing it, then the chance is like most people won't understand anything. But then if you make it too easy, someone like him is like, oh, I knew it was obvious. And I think I'll have to ask him with this one how he saw it. But yeah, I think they really managed to walk that line very well. You had some of your favorite quotes. Obviously, we touched upon some of them, but are there some others you want to go through?
Yeah. So one of the quotes I found really interesting comes at the beginning, and it's when Leo asks what is up in the lighthouse, and the guard answers, a sewage treatment facility. And actually, only in the recent watches, that is around the sewage treatment facility, like treating the mines, and yeah, I guess treating what is wrong with them with the lobotomy. And I guess, I don't know if maybe was that pretty obvious that it was.
It wasn't. It's not at all.
I only realized, in some of the latest watches, actually, that the meaning of that line.
Yeah, it's definitely not obvious, but it's definitely a good catch of like one of those lines. I mean, I'm sure when you have a well-crafted script, you could tell like no line is accidental. Like, something like this with someone like Scorsese or whatever. Like, no one, like, if someone says, oh no, they're just lying about something, it's like, yeah, obviously they're lying, giving you an excuse, but you would always choose something that symbolizes something else to answer that question. When does the lobotomy occur in the lighthouse, or is the lighthouse just nothing?
I think the lobotomy, I'm under the impression the lobotomy actually does happen in the lighthouse. One justification for that is at the very end, the very last scene when he walks away, they then show the lighthouse. The movie ends on the lighthouse.
Yeah, so
that's kind of that seems to point towards.
Yeah, God, that's a really dire way of thinking about a lobotomy, but yeah, that's definitely a good line.
Yeah. So another quote I really liked, and I thought it was interesting. There's quite a lot to it. Is his wife in one of his hallucinations. She says, Latus is still here, and you need to find him and you need to kill him. I did try and think what exactly she could mean by that, or what his mind is trying to say when he sees that. And I was wondering whether finding him is that a visual of him getting the lobotomy?
I think she means you're Teddy and Teddy is like a safe place, and you need to find Andrew Latus' real person and kill him, as in you can't go back to being Andrew Latus because that's too painful. Because she's obviously in his head, so she's like she's his mind trying to protect itself. So I think it's saying you need to find Andrew Latus and kill him. Obviously, when you hear it the first time, you think it's the guy in the Ward C or whatever. But no, I think what she's saying is that you can't go. What she's saying is you can't go back to being Andrew Latus because it's too painful, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So and another quote which I liked, especially the first time you watch it, because it's at this point that really things start to unravel, is no, not Boston, here, Marshall. I think it's because that's really like a turning point in the movie.
What context is that?
He was saying, "Oh, so you've been drugging me whilst I'm living in Boston," and the doctor replies, "No,
that's a
not
massive...
Boston, here, Marshall." Yeah,
that's the turning point when he's like, "You've been here for 2 years." You're like, oh fuck. Although I think first time watching that, you are still like, is he bullshitting him at this point?
Yeah, that is true. You don't know. You're not sure. Maybe the doctor is still playing in on it until I think okay, this is 100% is the shooting of the gun going through the doctor, and
that's all fake.
That is but I think that is probably the first most explicit time that it says that you realize that it's in
the things we're seeing are not
real.
that
it's in the imagination, because I think up to that point it was realistic, everything that you saw.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, I think it's important that they do that. It seems a bit annoying, as like I said before, the whole unreliable narrator. It's a bit frustrating, but I think they do need to explicitly show, no, the things you've seen aren't necessarily true, because some movies, they make different choices. Like some movies they'll never actually show you something, they'll imply it because they don't want to actually show you something on camera that's not real. But this movie clearly doesn't care. They're like, we're going to show you stuff even though it's not true. One of the lines I have that's interesting is at the end of Rachel 2, when at the end she said, I think when he says, "Oh, I need to go find my friend," and she says, "You have no friends, Marshall. Marshall, you have no friends." Which, again, this is his mind talking to him. So at first, I thought it was like, oh yeah, it's a warning because these people are all against him. But actually, I think on reflection, it's his mind being protective and being like, don't trust anybody. But actually, people are trying to help him. He does actually have friends, but he's just not, he doesn't trust them.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he starts, he uses he starts using that word friend rather than his partner. Yes. Actually at that point. There is a conscious decision of word there, that it's friends rather than partner. Because I think up until probably, around part way through, he was always calling him partner, but then he changed to friends.
Yeah, and there is actually something a bit weird about that, because again, on first watch, he's just met Chuck. Like they say, "Oh, you're my new partner" and stuff. But he is very trusting of him, and he obviously has an attachment, because at the end he does go to a lighthouse supposedly to try and save him, and he says like, "I was doing that." So I think that probably is the fact that he does have a deep-seated attachment to him as his doctor, even though at this point he's forgotten that he's his doctor. But I think he does know that he is his friend. He is trying best to help him. And we'll talk about this in the recasting, and Mark Ruffalo is really good, because he has to balance between being somewhat realistic as a Marshall, very much a supportive character, just sort of egging him on, but then not like at the end still like a sympathetic character that's an sympathetic and more importantly empathetic character, just like Ben Kingsley, that are, but they need to also, for them needs to be a section where you think, oh, is he in on it? Could he be a bad guy? And you do think that about both of them, but then at the end you're like, oh no, they are trying to help him. Then have you got any quotes from the George Noyce conversation?
George Noyce was trying to make him realize that it was all a game, and then but because Teddy wasn't accepting it, then his comment was, then they've already won.
George Noyce talks about Andrew Latus as if he's not there, like in the third person, but he's actually talking about Leo, who's right in front of him. Like that conversation is very much like you watch it in two completely different ways, and most of the stuff he says, like one, like at the quote I said earlier, this is a game, all of this is for you, you're not investigating anything, you're a fucking rat in a maze. You think he's saying that you've been brought here under false pretense and that they're trying to hide stuff from you. But what he's actually telling you is like they're doing all this role play for you. You're in a rat in the maze. Another one, sort of in that vein, is with the Rachel 2, and she says, "You're smarter than you look, Marshall. That's probably not a good thing."
Oh, yeah.
And then, as I said, I think my favorite quote, apart from the ending, is, "You are men of violence. I'm not accusing you of being violent men." And then, yeah, the final line, "Which could be worse, to live as a monster or die as a good man?" And then, I guess, it's not an iconic line or anything, but it is, I said how they speak a little bit funny, just because of the time and stuff. I gotta get off this rock, Chuck. I gotta get off this rock. It's a lot of lines like that he repeats quite a lot. So, let's talk about the production. So, it's a very broad category that we can talk about anything to do with how the movie is made, and I think this is a very well made movie. It very much feels a very particular way, and that comes down to how it's shot, comes down to the colors and the music and everything. What are the biggest parts of the production that stand out to you about like kind of create the whole vibe of the movie?
So I would say, in terms of the production, what stands out the most to me is the flashbacks with his wife.
The color differences.
Yeah, the colors. The burning with the ashes coming down from the ceiling, and also with the burning, her body all burning up. So yeah, I think the flashbacks, and also the storm. The storm is quite something, especially, and then the whole destruction around the island is quite impressive.
Yeah, that island feels horrible. Like, it feels wet and damp and confusing. And we talked about it earlier. There is the fact of, like, the way it's filmed inside. It's very much, like, lots of close-ups on him and him getting lost and him getting in the maze. And apparently there's a lot of play on, like, the depth of the vision and stuff. And that when things are more ambiguous, there's, like, the background is, like, blurry and stuff like that. So lots of artistic choices that go over most people's head in terms of how it was filmed. I think the music is a really big part of it as well. I found this out researching it. This is a general thing, not just this movie, but apparently Scorsese, he has a rule that he can only use songs that it came out before the movie takes place. Mm-hmm. So in like Goodfellas, whatever, he can't use songs that came out even a couple of years later. So in this case, the movie taking place in 1954, he could only use music that was older than that, and none of the music is original, so it's all pre-existing stuff. And so it's mostly modern classical composers. So, not Mozart, Beethoven, but like 19th, 20th century classical music. There was a song when me and Cena were watching it. I'll play it for you later, you'll recognize it. And I was like, this music is so familiar. And Cena wasn't too quite sure. And I Googled it, something about music from this, and it was the first thing that came up on Reddit. There's a song in this which is the main song in Arrival, the movie we did with Bardet in a very recent episode. And I think it's a song that plays at the end when you realize what happened to his wife in this. But it's like the theme song in that, and I was like, aha! I knew I recognized it. So quite funny to have the same song in two movies that have been on this podcast. But yeah, the music is a huge thing, and Scorsese always is heavily involved in picking that. Costumes are great as well. Looks very of its time without feeling too old.
Yeah, and also I think the costume is an interesting aspect of the development of the movie as well. There's lots going on there as you see them when they get. I mean, again, them getting if there is no storm, but yet they still do change costumes, and you see that transformation slowly from a marshal into more working on the island to obviously then he's actually a patient. Another thing, I don't know if you noticed this, is how his suit fitted him. And his suit actually doesn't. Teddy, his suit actually doesn't fit him very well, which is just because they probably found whatever they could and just threw it on him.
Now that you mention it, I did notice that it didn't suit him well, but yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way. But that makes sense. Here's one talking about the costumes. He's got a line somewhere because he's got about his ties and how he hates those fucking ties, but she gave it to him. Is there some sort of deeper meaning there? You know the line I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah,
I think it's in
yeah,
one
yeah.
of the flashbacks.
Yeah,
He says like, "Oh, I hate these
exactly.
fucking ties. I only wore them for
yeah,
you."
oh, yeah, and it's like, and he says, "Oh, I really like this tie because I think just because you gave it to me, but actually they're fucking ugly."
Yeah.
Yeah. Could they mean?
Yeah, this is a stretch. Maybe it just shows how tolerant he is. Like, he loved her so much and so irrationally that she'd give him an ugly tie and he'd be willing to like wear it around. So that's why he didn't dare confront her about her mental health problems and like why he obviously loved her a lot because he put up with all of this. So yeah, maybe it's just meant to show that his love was blind.
Yeah, but then burning it to blow up her car in the end.
There's a whole imagery thing about, so water represents obviously what she did to the kid.
Yes,
And that's
fire.
like, yeah, whereas fire represents and the fire is, so she burned down the flat. I think there's something about how they represent the two sides of his persona.
Well, I think water is reality and fire is
That's it.
his.
Yes, that's it.
And fire is the hallucination, the crazy part.
So it would make sense that he would use the tie that's tied to the hallucinations to blow up the car.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the when Ben Kingsley says, "I really loved that car." I don't know if there's meant to be any deeper meaning to that, but it's like, oh man, like it was a nice car, and he must have gone through a lot of trouble to bring it to the island and have it blown up. And you can tell he's like, "I've been trying to help you, and you blew up my fucking car." All right, so let's get to our recap. So you told us at the beginning about why you love this movie, but now we've really like laid out all the pieces. So if you could, like, kind of bring it back together about like touching upon particular things. Why is this one of your favorite movies? You said, for example, that it's like, oh, it's like the mind twist and stuff like that. Now that we've explained all the twists and the ambiguity, why is it... There's lots of movies out there that have plot twists and stuff. Why does this particular movie and this particular plot twist fascinate you so much?
So I would say this one in particular is because of the different layers to it. As you rewatch them, you're discovering each more and more. Even today, as we've been discussing it, we've found out different layers to it that we hadn't thought about it. And so I think it's that aspect that it's kind of in layers that you unpeel one by one, discovering new ones each time. And but also all the different themes that we've talked about, actually, when you read up on it and you discover that there's a lot more to it. As you say, every sentence as well. Every sentence isn't by accident. There's a lot of meaning to each one of them, and you can really, listening back to each of the conversations, you realize that there's a lot to each sentence that they say, and it can really brings back this part of the movie, that part of the movie. It all really it comes together bit by bit.
Fair enough. So a well-constructed movie. Would you say that you get intellectual stimulation? It sounds snowy, but intellectual stimulation from sort of figuring it out, and then maybe if you were to rewatch it, let's say tomorrow, you get a satisfaction from being like, oh, I understand that, and I understand that, of like, just kind of like a problem-solving thing. Yeah.
And also, I feel like little details are really enable you to then think about it even more. Another one actually we didn't mention, and this I noticed the last time we watched it, is the one of the inmates that they're interviewing. I mean, it just seems weird, but that's what they did, and I'm still not too sure the choice of this. Where she takes a glass of water. He asked her to go and get a glass of water. I don't know if you noticed, but the first gulp that she takes, she doesn't have the glass in her hand. She just goes like that with no glass in her hands, and I don't really know what I don't really know what that's about.
So you just work on that one next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's fun. That gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
So the big question: where does this rank all time for you? Is it number 1? Is it top 5? Is it top 10?
It is number 1 for me.
Number 1. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Stef's number 1 movie, Shutter Island, for all the reasons we've discussed today.